for this opportunity. My name is Johanna van Holt, and I will give you just a very brief overview of what the network is about for those of you who are new to us. The network was created to give all interested and affected parties the opportunity to voice their opinion, give their input, and be part of a collaborative effort to find solutions to the problems of mine dust. We have some great ideas of what we want to do, mostly as a result of brainstorming members. 2020 has resulted in some delays in execution of some of our plans, but we invite you to become part of this collaborative effort as we take it further. We welcome Dr. Cledwin Mangunda to the Mindust team, and I hand over to Cledwin, who will be chairing this discussion on recent developments and future trends. Thank you. Cledwin.
Thank you, Yuri. So thank you to all the participants who managed to join us. Right now, we'll just go straight into the program. The list of panel members who are going to be representing us on the respective themes. Mr. Brown Motsau, who's going to be representing us on community awareness and education. And we're going to have Mr. Vanus van Wyk, who's going to be representing us on mitigation and rehabilitation. We're also going to have Professor Stuart Pickett on monitoring and measurement. And then in the place of Dr. Sizwe Pakati, sorry about that. In terms of exposure and health, we're going to have Mr. Brian Mongoma speaking on that front. And the panelist who's going to help us on policy and law is Professor Tracy Linfield. So those are the panelists, and I'm going to give you a brief biography of each panelist before they then start off according to the program to give us the presentations that they have for us. So the first speaker was going to be Mr. Vanus van Wyk. Van Wyk, this is his short biography. And please take note of the instructions that are coming through on the charts on how to then communicate some of the questions and sentiments that you have to share. So he's the author of the Dust Management Guideline for Tailing Historic Anglo Gold. He's also worked in sustainable development, focusing on rehabilitation of mine impacted land, which has positioned him as an expert, so as other experts that are joining him on the platform. So he's a leader in terms of the practical application of environmental solutions at a large scale, and this has produced tangible results. He's also the founder of an NPO, which is named the Land Rehabilitation Society of Southern Africa, and he has worked with them in the mine rehabilitation sector for over 20 years as a practitioner, a consultant, a strategic advisor, and he's also had an academic stint with Northwest University with the School of Geo and Spatial Science. In terms of academic accomplishments, he holds a degree in earth science and industrial ecology, a master's of science in environmental geology, or both from NWU, an MBA from UNISA, ELP from Stanford, and a PGD in bioentrepreneurship from Basel University in Switzerland. Currently managing director of our Green Co, a mining rehabilitation and dust control service key in terms of enabling and seeing change in this exciting awareness. He wants to inspire the cohort of young professionals and be part of a contribution to the coming of a new order in terms of business thinking and society at large. We welcome you, Mr. Vanus van Wyk. The next speaker, Mr. Brown Motsau, who will be speaking on community awareness and education. He holds a diploma in computer and business administration with Stanford Business School. He's also got a certificate in journalism, another in industrial mission, and then another one in sustainable development. Then other qualifications from Cleveland, Ohio University, the Graduate School of Public Development and Management, Energy, as well as a certificate in project management from the Stellenbosch University. His experience covers a lot of areas in terms of community engagement and awareness, where he's been lobbying and advocating in terms of building local and regional networks, community environmental monitoring structures. He's sat on a number of steering committees. Some of them include the South African Water Caucus, driving green and blue drop water campaign, and also serves on a number of groups, including the amalgamation of civil society platforms, just to mention but a few. Our third speaker, who will be speaking to us on the theme of policy and law, is Dr. Tracy Linfield, who is a professor at the University of Witwatersrand and the current chair of the board for the Center of Environmental Rights, is in national and global mining policy, law and governance frameworks, which span more than. In 2019, she published State Governance of Mining Development and Sustainability, a global comparative study of how states balance mining promotion and the imperatives of development. Quite a dicey act that states need to do. She's passionate about securing climate justice and climate resilient development for men and women of Africa, not just in Africa, but men and women of Africa as well. Thank you, Professor Lynn Tracy Field, for joining us. And the fourth panelist will be Professor Stuart Pickett, who will be speaking to monitoring and measurement. He obtained his PhD in Geography and Environmental Studies from the University of Witwatersrand in 2000. He was appointed a full professor at NWU in 2012, and is as co-chair of the ESCOM Power Plant Institute in the School of Geo and Spatial Science, and as then director of that school in 2015. He's currently an NRFB-rated researcher, and that's a very high rating, and a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. And then over the past decade, he has also led research in the space of atmospheric science, focusing on the understanding of air pollution, monitoring stations, aircraft, etc., etc. Then, in terms of his other academic accomplishments, he has seen over 40 postgraduate students from successfully starting their studies and completing them. And these students have gone on to hold quite some prominent positions in government and in the private. He is also president of NACA, the parent company that is hosting this conference, in which we are also taking part in this technical session, over and above the other qualifications that he has and positions that he occupies. That's just a brief summary. The last is Mr. Brian Mongoma, who's standing in for Dr. Sizwe Pakat. Sorry? Sorry about that. Just a gentle reminder to all our participants to remember to switch off.
Edward, your mic is off. We can't hear you. Your mic is off. You need to turn on your mic.
Sorry. Thank you for that. I didn't notice that it had gone off. Our other speaker, final speaker, is Brian Mongoma. Thank you. And his qualifications are: he's hold a BTech degree in environmental health from Tshwane University of Technology, and certificate in environmental control from the Chamber of Mines, now Minerals Council of South Africa, and is currently doing his second year in his MPH with the Wits University, where in the School of Public Health. He's also working with the Minerals Councils of South Africa as the deputy head and occupational hygienist. He represents the interests of the MCSA members at the tripartite stakeholders meeting, and also direct regulators and other stakeholders in order to give input and on new or amended occupational matters. He is also a registered member of the Southern African Institute of Occupational Hygiene. And then he's also served as the PCC past vice chair for the same organization, and he's a member of the Mine Ventilation Society of South Africa. So those are our panelists. May we please welcome them. And without any further ado, I'll hand over this time to our first speaker, Mr. Vanus van Wyk. Vanus, it's your time.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. In the interest of saving a bandwidth, I'm not going to put my face up now. I'll put it up a bit later, and so then I will jump straight into the presentation. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to share my experience, and I'm looking forward to everybody's input as well, because more questions than answers here. But I'm going to briefly try and share with you what I've experienced with regards to the recent developments and future trends with regards to mine dust, the mitigation and rehabilitation part. So I spend most of my time physically on site and trying to see, how to solve dust problems for mines on a landscape scale. I think the biggest change that I've seen over the past couple of years is that environmental performance has now become a strategic pillar for many of the mining companies. And it's really important, because if the value is driving from the head down, then obviously mines need to deliver on that. And although far from perfect yet, even this document that I've shared with you come through 2 days ago from a very big mining company, that shows that their pillars of value revolve around safety, health, environment, socio-political, and people. And obviously, dust sits right, in the midst of those value drivers. So I think we also need to acknowledge that dust control is a legacy issue for many mining companies that's operated for more than 100 years. And we're sitting with 400 square kilometers of mine-impacted land, mine-affected land. And, how do we eat that elephant? Obviously, we need to sort that out as soon as possible. We've got communities right on the doorsteps of biggest of the largest mines, and to make a contribution to their quality of life, solving dust problems, really of great importance for us.
Mom has chicken's box.
I just want to make sure, is everybody hearing me well?
Yeah, we're hearing you well.
Yes,
we are.
Yes, thank you.
The biggest issues in my world obviously are tailings dust, haul road dust, stockpile dust, and open pit coal dust. And the solutions to solve these are there. We know what works. It's simply the scale that's a challenge, and also to work within the operational ambit of the scale. So, in the end, we can manage what we can measure. And I think that would be my message today is the biggest change has come in how we measure and how we try and make sense of the data, and how we try and make sense of the trends, and then try and intervene. And I would really welcome input as to how we can improve on measurements, trends, and then to see what the telling effects are on what we're doing. So the mitigation options I've mentioned, we have instant wetting, we can spray large areas. The surfactants that we apply on this on mine wastes are pretty abundant, and we know what works. With the revegetation and sorting out the chemistry of the materials that we've done for the last couple of years, putting wind shear barriers on and suppressing dust on large scale, that we can do. And even, just encapsulating the sources, it's something that we can do. I think in the end, the data that needs to inform the budgets to incorporate solutions on a large scale, and then to change a culture of expenditure specifically relating to mine waste facilities and haul roads and dust. I think those budgets still need to start to flow through. So, how does mitigation really translate in practice? Is a function which I call the four C's, and it's really simply about compliance. Compliance drives current dust control and rehabilitation behavior. The second step is complaints. Sadly, complaints are driving a lot of the action taken. Thirdly, it's complexity. So the decision support that we supply as an industry to decision makers, and that obviously drives action. And you know, to bridge the complexity and translate the narrative to decision makers, I think that is still quite a challenge. And then obviously cost. The cost bases are really fixed on mines, and therefore it's really challenging to draw more cost, more expenditure, unless we can demonstrate through data that it would justify expenditure, you know, on air quality. From an operational perspective, I think we need to take note of the fact that the mines are extremely risk averse. Where water is available, where water is on site, it's a risk. So mine dumps will go higher, they will go drier, they will go steeper, and you know, that's going to emanate, a lot of dust will emanate from these sites. There's also a big push on, yeah?
You need to be winding up.
Sure. Obviously reduced water, we don't have as much water on site available any longer, so how can we suppress dust without water? And obviously with reduced budgets, we have a challenge. There are a lot of guidelines, more guidelines are coming, but very few of the guidelines really tell us how to suppress dust on mines. So that, I think that is definitely a trend that we need to influence. Most mines are going to focus on surface assets, so more dust is going to come our way, and we see with climate change, obviously, more dust from agricultural townships and obviously from mines. So trends, obviously, we're moving into the risk-based approach. Real-time monitoring also becoming a huge trend in informing what we do. Dust is not really informing part of the climate change discussion yet, but it should, in my view. And then what we also see is a lot of community-based projects are attached to dust control. So, yeah, something that we can perhaps discuss. So, wrapping up, dust fallout information is paramount in how dust is going to be mitigated in future on mines. I believe mines can be designed and operated for reduced dust fallout. And I believe that the cost of dust control should be internalized, the externality should be capitalized, and it should form a new cost base for us to really see difference in action here. So that is my short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fanis. We'll come back to the Q&A on that one. Mr. Motsao is up next. Thank you for kicking us off, Fanis.
Sure.
You can be posting your questions already on the sidelines. I think it can be monitored, and then we can start attending to them once other speakers are off. Mr. Motsao, it's your time now.
Thank you, Chair. Let me try and share my slides quickly. Just give me half a second. Try to figure out technology. Okay, where are you? Hope it's this one. Are you able to see something on your screen? Hello?
Hello,
Yes.
Brian. Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Okay.
Just put it in slideshow mode.
Slide. Yes. I'm trying
Okay,
to do
thanks,
that.
Brian. Great.
Yes. Is it up now?
Yes.
Is it big?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I am going to just make a short presentation, and I am at the service of the Benchmarks Foundation. And just a quick one on the topic. Okay, now move. Okay, there. Did the Black South Africans, in particular, willy-nilly went and settled between the mine-tailing dams? Townships such as Riverlea in Johannesburg, where colored people were moved out of the white areas. You know, between 1955 and 1965, it was not by choice. The same thing can be said about Deep Kloof, Meadowlands, as a result of forced relocation. Also, that happened in Soweto, out of the white areas. And in areas like Tulani Snake Park, you can easily see, and I will show some of the photos of the dust settlement that people have to live with. And all these areas are part that were created, sorry, they were created by history of, sorry, I need to switch off my phone. They were created by part of South African history of forced relocations and so on. And these are just the 3 areas that I'm mentioning, but the list is endless. You can talk of Welkom in Free State, you can talk of Kwaguka in Mpumalanga, you can talk of Port Said in in Rustenburg, but equally so, you can talk of areas such as the Lokong and Atok in Limpopo. The same reality do exist. Okay, and this is a typical example that you would find in the near mine community, where you find the rock crush, because an assumption it is always made that only where the mining is operating or where it's on, there is dusting. But I have evidence of photos, I think thousands of them, where we could indicate clearly in areas such as Rivali and so on, where you would find old tailings that were dumped near where the communities are. And we still experience high level of dust in those areas. And an example is that in one of the areas, in particular in Rivali, there's a doctor, when we did the Policy Gap 12 research that we did about 2 years ago, who told us that there are all sorts of cancers that you can find in Rivali. And currently we are undertaking a research in Welkom as we speak, and it is yet we are doing it on behalf of another institution. Equally so, we are discovering that cancer is very common amongst the Black community that resides next to the tailing dams. And the history is very fascinating what we are uncovering. We are uncovering that Africans, they are not used to talk openly about the impact and the kind of illness that are associated with mining tailings. And in Welkom, we have spoke to a number of people, and all of them, they're telling us that tailings are seen or are viewed by the community as part of a case, despite the education that is out there of cancer and so on. People, they don't want to talk about it. They hide it. People, when they are ill, they could really relate it to another type of illnesses. They will say this person have cancer. Sorry, this person have tuberculosis. They can mention all sorts of illnesses, but cancer is treated with the same stigma as any other stigma that you can think of, such as HIV and so on. So we are discovering that is happening now in 2020. We've just returned from Welkom, and the same story we are hearing from a number of people that we spoke with, and some of them, they are already infected with HIV/AIDS. Here's a typical example of a photo that you could see in Deep Kloof. I'm trying to rush. Of a typical photo that you can see in Deep Kloof in Soweto. This was taken end of 2019. We took this end of 2019. And inhalation of the fine particles from the tailing dams or congestion of it, it does create all sorts of illnesses. And we are also finding the same pattern, you know, in Welkom, in Soweto, in Rustenburg, and so on. And the illnesses may not be the same. For example, in the gold areas, you would find a lot of people complain of, amongst others, silicosis and cancer. But in areas like Mpumalanga, Kwaguka, and so on, we find a lot of cases of people who are complaining with black lung illnesses. And while in Rustenburg and parts of the Bushveld, we hear a lot of people complaining of platinosis. And I happen to be part of the regional network of ex-mine workers, and all of them, you know, ex-mine workers in about 12 countries in Southern Africa, all of them, they complain of the same thing.
1 minute.
1 minute, you? Okay, sure. Here's a typical example of what I'm talking about. The minerals that you could find here, they're just mixed with water here, but you find all sorts of heavy metals, starting with arsenic, you know, barium, calcium, chromic, copper, mercury, magnesium. All of these minerals, they actually end up in people's bodies. And I'll give you an example of a, okay, I don't think I've inserted a photo of a child. There's a child whom we got a permission from his parents about who you can clearly see the impacts, and maybe I can share it during the time of Q&A. So I was trying to rush time. This was really a short time that I was given. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matsao. And my apologies for the time. We'll move on straight to Professor Tracy Linfield on policy and law.
Thank you, Cledwin. I am going to assist the webinar organizers by being fairly brief in my contribution, and just a request that I do not use my video, as my bandwidth here is quite low and I don't want it to lag. So I think the pictures from the previous speaker are reflective of what the legislative framework prioritized over many years, which was to treat mine dust as an occupational work issue. And even with the 1996 Mine Health and Safety Act that was enacted after the 1995 Leon Commission, which was really trying to strengthen and consolidate those provisions that try to regulate the health of the mine worker, not necessarily looking at how working conditions could change to prevent that harm occurring in the first place, but nevertheless trying to strengthen those positions. Still, it did not really address mine dust as an environmental or public health issue. In 1998, we had the enactment of the National Environmental Management Act, which laid down principles for environmental management in South Africa, and following that, the enactment of the Air Quality Act within that frame, a specific Environmental Management Act related to the National Environmental Management Act. And it is under that framework that we now have seen regulations being passed that try to address mine dust as a public health issue. Under this act, the National Air Quality Act, dust control regulations were gazetted in 2013. Many of the participants might be familiar with these regulations. And the purpose of these regs was to lay down a framework for really, firstly, a dust monitoring program, which would then, if certain levels were exceeded, translate into needing to prepare some kind of plan. And if that plan wasn't complied with, you had the potential for enforcement action in the form of criminal enforcement. So those are the regulations that are still currently in place. The dust control regulations of 2013 under the National Air Quality Act. Draft regulations which are intended to replace these regs were gazetted in May of 2018, but although it was mooted that they would enter into effect in 2019, I checked and I did not see that these regulations have yet commenced. So we're still dealing with the dust control regulations, which are seen as ineffective, really, in addressing this mine dust problem, and not adequately enforced. Has there been, is there any movement on the policy horizon? So it doesn't seem to me that there's anything, major in the pipeline. And if I look at some of the most recent regulatory instruments that have come out of the Department of Environmental Affairs, for example, the strategy to address air pollution in dense and low-income settlements, which was a strategy gazetted on the 17th of May 2019. Now, one would expect air pollution, low-income settlements, that you'd have some, at least, mention of mine dust. That strategy doesn't even mention mine dust. But what might be of interest in the near term is the deadly air case, which is a piece of litigation that was launched in June 2019 by Groundwork and the Vukani Environmental Movement. And the nub of this case is that what they are contending is that poor ambient air quality in the high felt priority area constitutes a violation of Section 24 of the Constitution, which is the right of everyone to an environment not harmful to health or well-being. And the remedy that the applicants are asking for is to order the government to promulgate regulations to give effect to the high felt air quality management plan. And that plan does flag dust emissions from open cast coal mining. So this case is going to be heard next year in May 2021. And what it's of interest to follow for a mine dust as public health issue, because we would hope to get some. Yes?
Yeah, let's under a minute.
Okay, no problem. We would hope to get some kind of pronouncement from the courts on the relationship between air pollution and the right to environment, and related to that, the obligations that rest on the state to deal with air pollution, which dust is inclusive. So that's the contribution from policy and law, and I've given you an extra minute, Cledwin.
Thank you, Tracy. We'll move on to Stuart on monitoring and measurement.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this. I mean, we know from our own measurements all around the country and all around the Highveld in the last 5 to 8 years, doing source apportionment studies, that dust is a significant fraction of the total particulate matter, ambient particulate matter suspended, and so it continues to be an important issue that we need to address. However, when we're monitoring and measuring dust, we really need to distinguish between dust, as you can really think about dust as being not one singular pollutant, but effectively being a series of different pollutants. In the first place, you've got to think about the total suspended particulate matter, which is really the very large fraction of the dust. And then you have the PM10 fraction of the dust, which has both slightly less health implications, but is important for wet deposition and dry deposition. And then, of course, the fraction of the dust in the PM2.5 or PM1 fraction, where we really start to see the health impacts of the dust and the impacts, for example, on visibility. So when we're setting up to measure and monitor dust, one really needs to decide which of the pollutants you're most interested in. And currently, when we talk about dust, and specifically dust associated with mine tailings, I mean, the standard practice is to measure that with the dust bucket. And of course, what the dust bucket measures is, at best, it measures the total suspended particulate, which is settled out, and it may measure some fraction of the PM10. But when you're talking about whether it's measuring the dust that is the most significant health implications, of course, that's not measured by, or not, there probably is no relationship between the dust buckets and the PM2.5 and definitely the PM1 fraction. So monitoring needs to set very specific objectives. So the advantage that we have currently with the dust bucket system, I'm going to switch my video off because it doesn't seem to be streaming very well, is that we have a very long data series. And that data series, as we saw in talks at NACA's session this morning, have very valuable information in it. And so that one wouldn't want to just continue that immediately. Real-time monitors, on the other hand, of course, can give us very high resolution temporal data, but they're extremely expensive. So where the dust buckets can be deployed over at many sites simultaneously, real-time monitors cannot. So for example, the cheapest real-time monitor that we currently can purchase and have recently done for a study for the University of Venda, it kind of amounts to probably around 10,000 Rand per instrument if we want to get some sensible number. And so to have a very big network of those instruments is expensive. I mean, if you go to an instrument that is dedicated for measurement outside, I mean, those numbers grow massively. Of course, if we're wanting to look at the impacts that dust has on the ambient air pollution and link dust issues to ambient air quality standard issues, we do need to move towards real-time monitoring. But we need to weigh up the benefits of what we get out of it. And so I think that there needs to be some synergy of thinking around how we monitor dust in the future. Of course, one positive aspect is that we have the development over recent times of low-cost sensors, as I've just pointed out, and those costs are coming down significantly. So I foresee that in the fairly near future, we would be able to deploy very high densities of low-cost sensors. And then, of course, the issue becomes the density of resolving the technology of retrieving all that data, and then, of course, making sense of all that data. So anyway, I think the key for dust monitoring remains that we need to specifically identify what our objectives are, and then apply the appropriate technology. And of course, the other thing that I also think that's useful to do as an exercise is try to link very carefully what the relationship is in the future between dust bucket measurements that have been done for many decades and real-time monitors. Of course, when you're thinking about dust, it's only not ambient suspended dust that is important. We also need to start thinking about other measurements associated with dust, like the emissions themselves, the deposition of the dust, both in the wet and the dry component. Okay, thank you. And the creation of profiles which we can use in chemical analysis of dust for source apportionment, for example. And those things also need to be accounted for. And we've made significant progress over the last 2 years in doing chemical profiling of dust, not only from mine dust, mine activities, but also other dust exposed areas in the country and in Highveld. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We'll move on to Brian, who's standing in for Dr. Sizwe Pagat.
Thank you, Program Director, and good afternoon, colleagues. Now, from my side, I'll be looking at the exposures and health. Now, I just have a brief presentation. I'm not so sure if it's projecting on that other side. Can you see it?
Not yet, Brian.
Screen, not yet.
Yeah, not yet. No, it's fine. It looks like I'm struggling with the presentation anyway. Now, as all of you know, that within the mining industry itself, we've got a variety of airborne pollutants, which inclusive of dust, fumes, dust, and all that. So, which are governed by, regulated by the Mine Health and Safety Act, as well as the recent airborne pollutant guideline that was issued by the chief, which was reviewed and issued in 2018. Now that has amended a few aspects in it because of we've seen there are certain critical issues that are impacting on the employees' exposure. Now, out of that airborne pollutants, then the mining industry, as a result of the occupational diseases that were not decreasing, the mining industry then came up with the milestones which were previously related to only respirable crystalline silica, which were came up in 2003 and reviewed in 2014. In 2014, we then introduced the respirable coal dust as well as respirable platinum mine dust. Now, with the view that everybody will be participating. Now, if you look at the stats from the DMRE as published in 2018, as most of know that we are lagging behind, a year behind with the statistics. So the one that has been published in 2018, you look at silicosis cases, they have been decreasing over years, over the 10-year period, as well as when you look at the overall airborne pollutant exposure, which are consolidated, not pollutant specific as reported by the DMR, the A category, which is greater than the OEL, we have been decreasing, we've been improving. But that also putting in the back of your mind that that has been consolidated. It's all the airborne pollutants put together. That's what the DMR is reporting on. Now, as a result, within the Minerals Council as well, what we did, we then looked at the exposure in terms of the individual pollutants that are impacting on the employees. And we then wanted to prioritize the ones that we need to deal with on an industry level, company or commodity level, which were then presented. We've got a forum within the Minerals Council, which look at the zero harm. It's a number of CEOs sitting at a forum looking at how can we improve the industry. Now, we then presented this to them that we want to look at respirable crystalline silica as well as respirable coal dust as our priority, especially from 2021. We know that we've got milestones. And as we're sitting here, we're not achieving the respirable crystalline silica as well as our aspirational targets, because what we did is that before 2024, we need to design our internal targets, which on a year to year, We are monitoring that, as well as reporting to the CEO Zero Harm Forum on a quarterly basis in terms of our performance. Now, having observed that with respirable crystalline silica and coal dust are not performing, we then came up with a new initiatives and a new way on how to report. Now, part of that, which the previous speaker has highlighted, is a continuous real-time monitoring, which is we've proposed that all the significant hazards that the Minerals Council has identified, we now have agreed that we are going to put continuous real-time monitoring. The how part we'll still have to develop.
You're left with under a minute.
Okay. Now, within this, Minerals Council has got some initiatives which are the leading practices. We've got 6 of the leading practices which members can see on the website, on MOSH website. So we've got different data. So we are doing our best in terms of reducing the exposures. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for that presentation. Missed part of it at the end due to sound. Maybe let's go into the Q&A and looking at all the questions and some of the discussions that have already started on the questions. It's quite interesting. Yuri, do you have a question?
I can start at the beginning if you want. Shahida Adams, which is also she's Associate Professor Shahida Adams, is part of our network. She asks, I think it's directed at Farnes. We'd like to know how compliant South African mining operations are with dust remediation and control measures, and any examples of best practice that you could point out.
Hi, Shahida. Gee, that's a tough question. So I've answered you in the meeting chat, and I think that South African mines are really trying hard with the monitoring equipment prescribed and with the modeling and within the legislative framework to provide the most current information that can be derived with the measures at hand. So I do think that from a compliance perspective, we need to ask what is seen as compliant. So from most of the data sets that I've seen, I think that most mines are managing the air quality to fall within the industrial fallout limit. But I've put it in my chat that a dust bucket is a risk indicator, and that's always how I will view a dust bucket. So when there is risk and 2 consecutive months in a dust bucket, then obviously more detailed studies are required and more intervention, in-depth intervention. So we need to define compliance. If we consider it from a perhaps community perspective, they don't want to see, frequent dust. So they might not link the expectations of compliance with what is seen in the dust buckets. Most mines have an environmental officer that looks after it, after dust control efforts. So resources are apportioned to that, and if that is viewed as compliant, then I would say that the South African mines are trying their utmost best to generate information and to see that they try and understand the air quality space better. In terms of continual improvements in air quality, I think that there might be a bit of a knowledge gap there to see year-on-year improvement, because our seasons are not the same and operations change. Compliance, yes, I think they're doing their best. How that is relayed through to communities, that is a different discussion. And then from a best practice guideline or best practice, I also think information is readily available today. There are a lot of consultants that advise on best practice. I do think that there has been specifically one mining company that's put a lot of effort into deriving a best practice guideline, which was Anglo Gold. And there are many other mining companies who were drafting internal guidelines and best practices for their operations. I do think that there is an opportunity to look at a regional approach to dust fallout management. So many mines are close together, and I do think there is space for us to put together something more formal for the industry. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Fanos, for that answer. Yuri will take the next question.
Yes, Fanos, that's why we like you at our network events, because you always have a lot to say. And this next one is for you as well. You did answer it in the chat, but maybe you can just briefly, Professor Giles Wicks from Oxford, one of our steering committee members, is also in the discussion. He's asked Fanos, I was wondering about the geochemistry of mine tailings and how rapidly revegetation can be achieved. Also, given wind velocity acceleration on the flanks of mine tailings, is there evidence for specific zones on mine tailings being particularly susceptible for dust emission? If you can just briefly answer that one.
Yeah, right. So, yes, the geochemistry has an effect on revegetation, success. We have figured out how to establish vegetation, at least for medium timelines, 10 years on really aggressive tailings. We know how to ameliorate it, we know how to irrigate it, and yes, we can establish vegetation on tailings. It takes about 3 months to establish and about 6 months to mature, and then if you maintain it, it will last for probably 7 to 10 years, depending on the geochemistry, but it can be done. On the specific high-risk areas, we have started to generate data on it, and you're absolutely right. There are certain areas more prone to be eroded, and we're starting to understand the landscape dynamics, which areas are more prone, and then we can address those areas as high-risk areas and then rapidly decrease dust fallout on a risk-based approach. And there's some data on implementing of that approach. So yes and yes.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry, I'm going to cut you here. Sorry, Cledwin. I'll just move on quickly because. So we also have a comment from John Selby, who's known from Saldanha Bay, quite a contentious area in the Western Cape. The issue of mine dust is not restricted to mine site or environs. It is also a problem for the whole transport chain from mine to export ports or domestic processors. And then there's a question on, is it possible to utilize tailings to produce construction material from Chiamo? Jenny, you want to quickly, I know you're an expert, you want to quickly handle this one?
Sorry, you caught me on the back foot there. Will you just which question are you addressing? I'm busy writing down the others.
I know with SEBA's work on utilizing mine tailings.
Yes, I was actually just thinking about that now. Yes, so tailings has come on really strongly as a culprit for dust, and somebody asked if we can use them, and absolutely, that's another big research thrust of mine. Really, there is no need for us to have tailings at all, in my opinion. So there is a lot of work being done on that, on repurposing tailings. There's a lot of options that we can apply to recovering metal value, looking at downstream use of the bulk materials, and here we started this work about 10 years ago, and the mining industry and everybody sort of rolled their eyes and thought, blue sky. But what we're finding now is that ever since the big tailings disaster in Brazil, that this is starting to gain traction. And so I have a whole group on LinkedIn that is really now actively explore all over the world, exploring how we can work together to actually remove tailings and thereby remove these long-term risks associated with tailings, and that's the big problem. You know, they dry up, they're left there forever, and they do pose a dust risk.
Okay, then a question, do the current dust from Ian Haldness, City of Cape Town?
Jonan, may I attempt that one as well?
Yes, go for it, go for it.
Because the truth of the matter is the gold tailings in particular, you know, they have uranium and they have cadmium, and therefore they fall under National Nuclear Regulator. And if, for example, we see what is happening in Snake Park and people are starting to use that for construction, the likelihood is if it has not been declared fit to be used by a nuclear regulator, it cannot be used for housing. And the number of houses that we've discovered that through the research that we are doing, that people are residing in houses that actually in the time of apartheid, some of the houses were built using tailings and they have asbestos roof on top of them. And a lot of people are getting ill as a result of that. And I don't know if it is healthy at all. That's just my take, to use the tailings in the current state that they are. And the moment, the truth of the matter, just responding to the previous speaker, the truth of the matter is once the mines start operating, the effort to mitigate dust mines stops. And we see that everywhere, whether you're saying in Free State, in Welkom, or the 2,500 that you see from Springs in the Witwatersrand, from Springs all the way to Virginia in Free State, you know, in an S shape. Once the mines start operating, all efforts to mitigate the dust immediately stop. And that's a fact that cannot be denied.
Thank you, Brown. I think you bring about the two-pronged nature of secondary resource utilization, that you need to extract whatever is of value, whatever is the pollutant, before you can then use the other products for secondary use. And I think Jenny in her research, they're covering that as well, especially looking at the fact that some of these tailings have now got the quality of ore, which is synonymous with what used to be the ore back then. So you now have a very good situation where the tailings are now a source of value as opposed to just a formerly disposed useless material in quotes. So thanks for bringing that. That is a critical point, Brown. Yore, may you please help me with the next question? I can see the one from Ian where...
Yes, okay, Ian Haldnes from the City of Cape Town. Do the current dustfall regulation residential dustfall rates offer adequate protection to communities given the heavy metal content of some of these mines and other sources? I don't know, Stuart, you want to have a go at that one, or...?
Oh, sorry, Joe, you're going to have to repeat that for me.
Do the current dustfall regulation residential dustfall rates offer adequate protection to communities given the heavy metal content of some of these mines and other sources?
Stuart, I'll take that if you want. It's Harold.
Go ahead, Harold.
This question reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of monitoring. The dustfall monitoring is a monitoring for management purposes. Monitoring per se does not protect health. As Stuart said in his presentation, one has to understand the objective of monitoring programs, and dust buckets, for all their simplicity, provide a prompt and effective management information to give warning that a dust source is either well managed or not well managed. If it's not well managed, that the owner of the facility has to take action to mitigate that dust. It does not protect the health per se. And to suppose that continuous PM10 monitoring is somehow a better monitoring device that will protect people is totally erroneous thinking. The delay in interpreting PM10 or PM2.5 data to condense it and attribute the source fraction to the source can take several weeks to months or years of source apportionment before the information is available and doesn't assist in any way for management. And this applies as well to the comments from Professor
Humby.
About the regulations. The dust control regulations do not contain penalties for exceeding a dustfall standard. The only penalties that apply is a failure to implement a dust management plan. So it's very hard to establish cause and effect between dust and health. And so the monitoring is only a referee. It's not a substitute for health protection. It is not intended to be a health study. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thanks. Harold, we've had many debates about this, and we will continue to have debates about it, because in the dust fall regulations, it does also refer to monitoring identified or likely sensitive receptor locations. But we'll debate this at some other stage, because we're running out of time.
Johanna, can I just say something?
Yes.
Listen, just a quick one. Yeah, just a quick one. Oh, okay.
There's one more question, or shall Jenny want to wrap up? Cledwin, what do you want to do?
I'll take Brian's last question. Jenny wraps up.
Yeah, okay. Please take a couple of questions. I'll take 1 minute to wrap up, because
okay. So there's really one more. Sorry, there was a question from somebody before, Kaketse, on the issue of dust trapping. What possible health effects might arise to workers on the ground, and what mitigation approaches would be put in place to curb those impacts? So this is quite a long question. I think, Kaketse, maybe you can join our conversation in the network, and we can tackle that. So Brian, Cledwin, was Brian wanting to ask a question or make a statement?
How real, this is to Brian, how real is the decline in reported occupational lung disease, given, I think it was meant to be given the contraction in mining industry and the lack of occupational health service provision to miners post-employment? Does the DMRE report rates or absolute numbers as declining? Autopsy data suggests increases in silicosis and TB in miners. So is what was being reported real with what is was on the ground? Brian, may you please respond to that?
Thanks, Chairperson. Shaida, to be honest with you, a lot of mines are not reporting their data to the DMRE. And also some of the employees, when they leave to post-employment, they die without the DMRE knowing. We've been trying to implement a system which is real-time, and also being able to follow the employees that have the ex-employees that have contracted the disease. So we are in a process of gathering all this information, hoping that in future we might have a real-time data that will be able to give us the real figures. But as it is now, we are depending on the mines to report to the DMRE, and as the DMRE enforces the regulations. But with the figures that we have, it's what we get to from the mines. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Brian, for bringing that answer. I think it ties in quite well with what is being observed in the States, where you can see that black lung disease has been on the rise since 2010. They are really looking into what could be the possible causes. So internationally, we're also having that. But I think we can continue this discussion even further in the group. Jenny, the time is a minute. I think it's your time to wrap up, and thank all the panelists and the people that are. Jenny, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Yes, so thank you to the panelists. Guys, you can see we've just scratched the surface. We need 3 hours, not an hour. So really, if you're interested, please go to our website, sign up for our mailing list, join in these discussions. As I think came across very strongly, we have more problems and solutions still. That, you know, dust remains a huge issue. It's a human rights issue. Brown spoke about the fact that probably we don't even know half the health effects because people aren't even reporting them. Measurement and monitoring is key, but probably not, you know, the ultimate solution. We're going to need a lot more than that. There are some, Farner spoke about risks that I thought, you know, were quite scary. He spoke about, you know, climate change posing even more of a dust risk, drier, higher and steeper tailings dumps, and reduced availability of water to suppress dust. So these are all scary problems going forward. There does seem to be, the good news is on monitoring and measurement, that there are some low-cost sensors that have been developed. We seem to be making headway there. The Minerals Council spoke about how they're starting to recognize the importance of actually identifying key pollutants and not just treating dust as a homogeneous substance, and that they're doing more measurements there, also real-time measurements. So I think we're starting to see some breakthroughs in the measurement, and as Swanis mentioned, we cannot manage what we do not measure and monitor, but we've still got quite a long way to find these solutions, and we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and this is why these conversations are so important. Thank you.
Okay, all right, so the next session, if I can just let everyone know, the emissions offsets in South Africa, if you want to move to that. Thank you very much to our panelists. Sorry, Tevin, do you want to say anything?